Welcome to the CNalysis podcast. I'm your host, Chaz, the director of CNalysis. Today, we're doing a little promotional podcast, getting to inform our listeners, subscribers, what the bang for your buck is. We've been talking about that. This is a project we unveiled last year. It's built by our own Jackson Martin, our oddsmaker, to model identifying what are the best districts to invest in. And that's based on several factors that we'll go over in this podcast. Last year, we just did it for the Virginia House of Delegates, and it was very successful. I'm very glad with the model last year, but I'm even happier with the model this year because of its level of detail. And not only that, but we're going on a national level now. The national model won't be up until July, but throughout the course of the next few months until then, we will be doing state by state level stuff. Jackson, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, nice to be here.
So what are the factors that go into the model? How does the model identify what the best districts are for people to get a bang for their buck?
So with how the model is set up, it uses 5 primary metrics that go in to get like an overall rating. Those being the chamber rating, so where this chamber is situated compared to others. If it's a toss-up chamber, it's more heavily weighted. There's the rating for the actual tipping point in the state. So it compares that district to whatever the tipping point district in the state is and says, okay, well, if it's the same as the tipping point district, it's probably going to be important. So it gives it more weight because of that. And then since normally we don't include presidential data, but because these are new lines and incumbency effects are not really set in and we don't know how they'll exactly, guesstimate. Yeah, so we use that as a sort of smoothing factor. It compares the tipping point in that district to the tipping point in that state based on the presidential margin. We also have a fundraising modifier, which we'll go into a bit more later, and the district rating modifier, which looks at an individual district itself and says, okay, well, if this is a toss-up, should probably invest in it. And then there's a sort of adjuster we add at the end once we calculate that value, where we look at how many competitive districts there are in that chamber. The main house, for example, there's 39 seats that we consider competitive. So it doesn't really feel like it makes sense to say that, okay, it's a toss-up chamber and every toss-up district, basically with how the math is set up, it would put all of those as the top priorities nationally, which doesn't really make sense. So it kind of adds a modifier, which is based on a inverse log, I think, that'll say, okay, if there's a lot of competitive seats in this state, we're going to drop the importance a little bit of each individual one because each individual one is less likely to actually be that important. And that's in broad strokes, everything that goes into the model.
Yeah. And one of the things I should note is that obviously we're only including competitive districts in the model. And also we're only looking at highly competitive chambers. And when I say highly competitive, I mean likely R to likely D, the very likely rating, which represents about a 9 in 10 chance of something happening. For chambers, very likely chambers are excluded. We do have very likely districts here just to see where they will land. For example, for why we're including something like that, for a toss-up district, you could have a district that has a lot of money invested in it, and that will bump it down. That'll hurt its value, obviously, in the model, because, if you're contributing $5 to a $1 million state Senate race in Michigan, you're not really getting much there, when you could have a slightly less competitive district in, say, the Alaska House, where that $5 can actually have a little bit more of an impact. Yeah, well, you were talking about the modifier. If you could go over that.
Like the one we apply at the end?
Yeah.
Okay, so that one is applied. I would call it the competitiveness in chamber modifier. The math specifically is it's just 1 divided by the log of however many competitive seats there are plus 10, which ends up so I think we have a range of 4 competitive seats in a chamber to 40 about approximately for what we're doing. And that means that the modifier ranges between 0.6 and 0.9 approximately. So that is basically the previously calculated investment value, which takes the 5 metrics I talked about. It takes that and multiplies it by that competitiveness modifier. That basically smooths things out, because what we noticed early on when we were developing this model is before we implemented that, basically the top 10 districts that I was recommending people invest in were all toss-up Maine state house races,
Right.
which it doesn't make sense with, I don't think that if you're thinking on a national scale, your $10, like your $20 should all be going to Maine state house races. So we added that modifier because we realized, okay, well, Maine state Senate, that's important too. Maine state house, that's important too. So we should have something to normalize that and make it, more reasonable what the model is recommending.
One thing I do, I think one thing that for people who may be considering subscribing to this, I think our main thing that I forgot to talk about earlier in the podcast is, I guess one of the reasons why we did this is because we saw how much money was burned in 2020. That's why we did this in 2021. And, we're already kind of seeing that this year with, for example, Marcus Flowers. In the last quarter, he raised $1.3 million against Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene is, a big boogeyman for Democrats, but her opponent has, $1.5 million cash on hand. I think the biggest example of the waste of money, a boogeyman or whatever, would be Amy McGrath, right? In 2020. But, a lot of people forget about Sarah Gideon and how she got her ass kicked, but she was still in a competitive race. But still, one of the things that I think is important is the overinvestment in these competitive races. And so that's, a good thing that, we have here when it comes to the fundraising modifier. Now, I do want to note that there are, I think Connecticut is the only state in the states that have competitive chambers. I think Connecticut is the only one that has publicly financed campaigns in their state legislative elections. So can you talk a little bit more about the fundraising modifier and how that will be affected, that state specifically?
So for Connecticut specifically, the fundraising modifier there will essentially just go in as a 0 for all of those races, because, ultimately, since they're publicly financed, there isn't an effect of fundraising. More broadly, the fundraising modifier, this is something we still need to wait to see with how it's set up. So with Virginia, we could, since it was just one chamber, the fundraising modifier could be overall fundraising, because all districts had roughly equal population, roughly equal costs of campaigning in those districts. The challenge with doing it nationally is that, all these districts have different populations, right? So like Alaska's House districts are like 18,000 people, ranging up to like 166,000. Yeah, 164,000 for Colorado, like state Senate districts. So there needs to be a way to account for that in the fundraising. So the current metric we're working with is the like median money raised per person for the fundraising modifier, and it will compare the median amount of money raised, compares the money raised in a district to the median, and then says, okay, is this district overinvested? If it's overinvested, it negates it. Is this district, does it have a huge differential between parties? If there's a huge differential, there might already be too much of a gap to make up, so it's less, important to invest in.
Yeah, and last year, obviously, we didn't have the fundraising per person. I think that's a great thing that we've added for, a national model like this in the bang for your buck this year. Because obviously, again, last year we're just doing Virginia House, but I think that's a good thing to help identify, just how much dollars are being spent. per person in that district. And the way we do it is we took a look at the average district population. We don't pull up the exact amount in each district, but it's the average population, so it's close enough.
I think we might need to, as we get fundraising numbers in and we see how the model responds to that, we might tweak the fundraising modifier a little bit. Ideally, we want to keep it as it is. It's slightly untested right now, so it might be something where we have to wait and see what happens, and if we're getting really crazy modifiers, we might go in and adjust some things.
And we also have state level models as well. We're actually going to be launching this week with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As someone from Virginia, I can't get that wrong. can't call it a state.
They'll get on you for that.
No, it's more of a Virginia thing. I don't think Pennsylvanians care about that. Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the state level models that we have?
Yeah, so the state level models, what they do is, so we have the overall sheet, which has about 330 individual state house and senate seats on it. What we do for the individual ones is we will sort by that state, essentially. So state house and state senate races in, let's say, Michigan, and it'll say, okay, let's find the maximum value of that list and then divide everything by that. So then it gets it on a 0 to 100 scale for that state. And then we just sort that. And the great thing about doing it that way, it normalizes the fundraising. So on a national scale, the issues I brought up with the fundraising modifier would be on the national scale, because maybe races are more expensive to run in Minnesota than Michigan. I don't know personally, but that might be something that occurs, and that would kind of throw things off nationally. But if you do things broken down by state, everything within that state, fundraising wise, is under the same, I guess, quote unquote, overall fundraising conditions. Like races in Minnesota will have the same approximate need for cost per person, whereas it might not be the same for the cost per person in Michigan. So that helps normalize it a lot. And yeah, so and that way also, if somebody's only interested in, let's say, Minnesota, they can just look at Minnesota and just see what's most important in Minnesota and what they should invest for in there.
Yeah, some people may not be interested in the national model, which is fair, and they just want to focus on an individual chamber, focus on maybe their home state or just a specific state. And so that's one thing I also do like about this, and that is what we will be doing again up until late July, because Minnesota's the reason why we're not going to have the official national model until late July is because Minnesota's very late first campaign finance deadline. Now, when you do subscribe to Bang for Your Buck, you will have access to this sheet. We have a Google sheet that has everything. We want to be transparent about this. What we did last time at Bang for Your Buck is I would just show the investment value for each of the House of Delegates districts. But basically, when you subscribe to Bang for Your Buck, anytime that we have an update in the model, it'll be a very brief email. You'll get the link to it. Only people who are subscribed to Bang for Your Buck are able to access this sheet. So those emails will be added so that they can actually view the Bang for Your Buck model in the Google sheet. Well, for those who are interested in kind of reading more about this, if you go to the CNalysis homepage, it is the top article right now that Jackson wrote, just kind of summarizing the Bang for Your Buck model. Well, if there's nothing else, you can subscribe to the Bang for Your Buck newsletter. Again, we update this model every time there's either rating change or we get new campaign finance data. And again, this week we have Pennsylvania. And then next week we have a lot of states. Actually, we got 4 states. We got New Mexico, Oregon, Nevada, and Colorado. So we will be having the state level models out for those states next week. This week it's just Pennsylvania. Yeah,
Chaz, you're going to be keeping me busy.
Yeah, with both the Bang for Your Buck and and the ratings. We're kind of doing quality checks on the ratings after candidacy filing deadlines. So I'm going back and seeing, who's retiring for the incumbents, who's running, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think that's a good amount of information for potential for the listeners who hopefully go and subscribe to Bang for Your Buck. If you want to support CNalysis, we're a bunch of scrappy college kids who like state legislative elections, and we greatly appreciate you subscribing to the newsletter. It's $5 a month, or you can do the cheaper option, slightly cheaper option for $50 for 1 year. But yeah, Jackson, thank you so much for coming on and getting to talk about this.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you all for listening, and we will be having Jackson on soon. Ben Forstate will also be coming on the podcast in the next episode, and we'll be going over the Pennsylvania legislative races this year, the competitive ones there. Stay tuned.